Once, a long time ago, a man decided he wanted some wisdom. So he left behind everything he knew and went up into the mountains to be alone with his thoughts. That way, he would think deep thoughts and he would find wisdom. And what he discovered after he'd been up there about 27 years is that if you stay by yourself long enough, people will show up and ask you questions. Because they'll figure that if you've been thinking about things that long, you will know something. The only problem is, they often come up asking you questions that you're pretty sure they could figure out if they would just go sit somewhere by themselves. But since most people didn't want to do that, they just wanted to know what you said, they would show up. And so it was that one day he was sitting in his cave, thinking deep thoughts about what was important to him, when he heard He turned around, and behind him was a young man. And the teacher thought, okay, well, here we go. Come in, come in, come in. Have a seat. And the young man sat across from him. He had one of those very, very serious looks on his faces. And the sage said, what do you want? Why have you come here seeking me? And the young man said, I want to know, how can I tell the difference between good and evil? Now, the sage thought to himself, if you don't know the difference between good and evil, you're dangerous. But he thought, he did come asking the question. I will see if I can help him. The sage said, well, that's very easy. And he put his hand on the young man's head. As soon as he did that, the young man's eyes closed. And when the young man's eyes opened, he and the sage were standing in a strange place. They were standing in a place where everybody had their arms outstretched and their elbows were locked. And all around them was tons of food to eat. But they couldn't eat because their elbows wouldn't bend. And so despite the fact that they were surrounded by so much good food to eat, everybody was starving. And the young man looked around and he said, this must be evil. The sage said, yes, it is. Do you understand? And he said, yes, evil means that you can't get what you want and so you're starving. No, doesn't mean that. Let me help you. And he put his hand on the young man's head again, and the young man closed his eyes. And when he opened his eyes, it looked like they hadn't really gone anywhere. Everything was the same. The people were still sitting around a table, and there was still food there, and their arms were still completely outstretched. Their elbows would not bend. But these people were quite different. They were happy. They were laughing. And the young man couldn't figure it out at first, and then he realized what was happening. They were feeding each other. And he said, I understand. And the sage said, I hope so. Now you go out in the world and do good. Good happens when we stick together and help each other. So go forth and do good.